Dear respected Thay, dear brothers and sisters, so we are in lazy days, and it feels a little bit funny to be having my voice over the loudspeaker. So we just had the family retreat here at Deer Park, and it's amazing having all the kids running around again for the first time in 2 years since the pandemic started. More than 2 years. And we had a chance to go up the mountain with the families and watch the sunset, and as well as to play games with the kids and cultivate 5 powers in Oak Grove with Brother Peace and some others in the children's program. And I think that the energy in the monastery has gone up. That afternoon, after the families left, we were sitting around and we felt kind of high, very joyful with the energy of so many families that could reconcile, practice beginning anew, connect with the peaceful energy of the monastery. That's really Thay's dream, and the dream of Plum Village is to have a living community, not just individual solo meditation practitioners, but brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, children, and having them all practice together and practice loving speech and deep listening. So I felt very, very nourished. And in my group, my Dhamma sharing group, there was a lot of a number of parents, and they are very concerned about the kind of environment in which their children are growing up. And we talked in the past few classes about changing our environment. And today we're going to talk about going in. So the topic is manas. And what in Buddhist psychology is something like the id in Freudian psychology. But it's that quality that's always grasping after things. And it's responsible for a lot of our suffering. So number 35. Manas has the tendency to seek for security and long-lasting pleasure. It is ignorant of the law of moderation. It means it lacks insight. The danger is ignorant of the law of moderation. The danger of pleasure seeking. And the goodness of suffering. Thay often talks about the goodness of suffering. It does not see the necessity for insight. For insight into impermanence. No self. Interbeing. Compassion. And communication. It means it doesn't know loving speech and deep listening. So, we've learned many times about Buddhist psychology, using this model of the mind. And manas is like, arises at the border of store consciousness. So remember, here is the mind consciousness, and we have the sense doors, the eyes, ear, nose, tongue, and body. That allow sense impressions into our mind consciousness. And we have store consciousness. Down here. So those qualities that are innate in us, that we receive from our ancestors, they are all there in store consciousness. And in the form of seeds. So we use the metaphor of a garden. But they are latent tendencies. So we all have the latent tendency to be angry. But we're probably not angry right now. But none of us believes that there's not the seed of anger in us. So that is the store. It means that anger is there in its seed form. But when conditions are sufficient, they can touch the seed of anger and it comes up in mind consciousness, like a flower. Sometimes not a very beautiful flower, the flower of anger. And our face becomes very ugly and aggressive. So manas is, Thay often described it as being on the surface of between the store consciousness and mind consciousness. And it has a tendency to grasp. And it tries to grasp at the seeds in store consciousness. So it's living here. With all of these visualizations, it's important to remember that it's just a metaphor. It's just to help us to understand our mind and not take it too literally. And remember that, for example, store is not there if there are no seeds. Store is all the seeds. So it's not like a container which holds the seeds. It is itself just a name we give to the latent tendencies that are there, that are not yet manifesting in mind consciousness. In the same way, manas is not something that's physically there. It's the tendency to grasp at these latent tendencies and think they are me, mine, or myself. So it's the quality within us that's always, it's like this grasping arm. And when we feel fear, when we feel insecure, then that's when manas manifests. And it starts grasping at our idea about ourselves. And it tries to get in and say, this seed of anger, this seed of mindfulness, that is me. And it can never be satisfied. If you pay attention to your mind, no matter how hard you try to grasp at something, it's like trying to grab onto a waterfall. It just goes through your hands. You can't hold on to it. It just goes through, or grabbing onto the air itself. But that doesn't mean that the act of grasping doesn't cause suffering. So that's what gives rise to our suffering. We don't actually grasp onto those seeds in our stored consciousness, but the trying to grasp, the action of grasping, creates tension in our body, and that is suffering. That tension brings about anxiety, fear, stimulates our hormonal system, right? We get like adrenaline, cortisol. We feel like we need to run away. And that's why we talk about running away from our suffering. It's because we feel fear. We feel like we're in some kind of bodily threat. Somebody is trying to hurt us. And manas is like, Thay often described it as a survival instinct. I see it as a survival instinct gone awry. It means we're not actually threatened with death, but we act like we are. And we get the habit of acting like we're constantly being threatened by things that people say, by our own thoughts about ourselves. And really anything can give rise to fear. Mostly it's our wrong perceptions. So of course, when we are in a corner and somebody is holding a gun to us, our head, there's some reality to our fear of dying. So that survival instinct serves a purpose. The problem is that most of the time we're not threatened. And yet we feel like we're threatened, and so we lash out. And so the grasping of manas, like to try to preserve and protect our life, that leads to this tendency to grasp onto a self, self-preservation. So manas arises from store consciousness. And because it is functioning so quickly, and it overrides our better judgment, our insight. It doesn't act with insight. It just lashes out in every direction, trying to protect, to continue ourselves. So it has a quality of self-preservation, but it is that lack of insight which causes it to create suffering for ourselves and suffering for other people. So there's a kind of intelligent selfishness that is full of compassion and understanding, where we take care of ourselves and we also take care of others. So we don't see ourselves in a threatening situation. So we recognize that fear, the action of manas, to try to preserve ourselves in a life or death situation, and we just smile to that tendency and just say, I know you are there, but I know that you also don't act with wisdom. You don't have much insight. So I'm not going to let you drive the car. I'm not going to let you drive my action, my thinking, drive my actions of speech, my bodily actions. So we let go. So that's why the Buddha taught many, many times this teaching on letting go. The mindfulness of breathing starts with awareness of the breath, and it goes in the direction of releasing, of letting go. So the grasping energy of manas becomes weaker and weaker. It's not, it's not constantly trying to defend itself and then cause suffering for others. Maybe we can listen to a sound of the bell. So, seeking for security. We may feel nostalgia for good times that happened in the past, and when those memories come up, we grasp towards them. So, for example, those memories are stored in store consciousness, and from time to time, manas goes back in there, and it's trying to recreate those memories. It's not concerned about whether we're truly happy in the present moment. It's trying to preserve the self. It sees the loss of those memories, of those good times in the past, as itself, and it needs to grasp on. So there's this tendency of going in, grasping towards ideas, memories about the past, rather than being mindful, for example, of our senses in the present moment and seeing that we have enough conditions to be happy right here and right now. We don't need to grasp after those memories of the good times. And in fact, by grasping after those good times, we water the seeds of fear, despair, and anxiety, because we feel like we've lost our happiness. Our happiness is something that only exists in the past, and we cannot feel happy again in the present moment. And that is a kind of sickness propagated by manas. We keep going into maybe we were beautiful in the past and now we feel we're not so beautiful. Maybe we were light and free in the past, and in truth, it's more complex than that. There's also suffering in the past. But in that moment, manas doesn't care about the suffering and the pain. It only wants to see the good things. So it has a very distorted view. That's why it lacks insight. With insight, we can see that suffering and happiness inter-are. But when we don't have insight, we think that we can get happiness without suffering. And so we, in our mind consciousness, manas just grasp at the pleasurable moments, and thinking that if it just keeps reproducing that in an obsessive way, it can be happy. And so whether we're addicted to alcohol or drugs, or I always think of, sometimes as I know mothers, they want to have their whole family come together. Their greatest happiness is when everybody is home in the house. All the children and the grandchildren and maybe the great-grandchildren and the aunts and uncles. And she feels, if only everyone would come together for Thanksgiving or Christmas, then I would be content, I would be happy. But the reality is, people make mean jokes with each other, get on each other's nerves, complain about the food, have trouble, spend 5 hours in traffic driving to get there. And actually, when we look at it, it's a mix of suffering and maybe some happiness and pleasure, but it's all mixed up. But in her mind, the quality of manas is there, grasping at this ideal, this image that is being projected onto store consciousness. So manas also has a quality of projecting. It's like a projector. Shining images onto store consciousness, alluring images of happiness. So actually the whole industry of pornography functions in this way. And many other things, advertisements. You see a beautiful palm tree with the sun setting off the Gulf of Mexico, and you think, there is my happiness. So we have externalized the function of manas through advertisements, through films, books, magazines. It doesn't mean they are bad, but they are an image of our happiness that manas is then projecting, and we think, even we read a beautiful book, we think that book is now me. Now that I've read it, it's somehow become part of me. And there's a quality of grasping, like I am that. So Buddhist psychology is based on letting go and trusting in our innate wisdom in the present moment, not needing to grasp at the past or at the images we project into the future. Because manas is also not only projecting images onto the past, which may or may not be true or reflect reality, but it's also projecting images into the future. This is like a film screen on the screen of store consciousness. Here's the past, our past, and the future. And the interesting thing about the film screen is that the seeds are still there, but they're being obscured by our perception. The perception that manas is projecting and grasping at. So Thay said our mind is like a cinematographer. It is projecting all the time images of our happiness. And manas is like in a multiplex theater, looking at all the movies that are on play. Some of them are horror films, some of them are love stories, some of them are adventures. And depending on the moment, we decide which channel or which movie we want to see, and we project it onto store consciousness. It's very humorous, huh? But this is actually what goes on. I mean, we could see it, right? You see this quality of the mind to project happiness, images of happiness. So when we talk about the cornerstone of Plum Village being dwelling happily in the present moment, it sounds very simple, but it's very deep. It's touching on all of these aspects of our mind. It means that we no longer are, we practice not to get carried away by manas and its tendency to project alluring images of the past and alluring films about the future. We give rise to mindfulness. So luckily we have a seed of mindfulness. And if we practice regularly with the Sangha, cultivating mindfulness. For example, members of the Order of Interbeing, they commit to having 60 days of mindfulness per year. And if you are living in the monastery, you get 365 days of mindfulness. So I figured out when I was young that it's much easier to go become a monk and live in the monastery. Then I don't have to organize days of mindfulness and get people together. So if you've done that a lot, then the seed of mindfulness can become very, very large, very strong. And in any moment, you know how to touch the seed of mindfulness and invite it to come up in mind consciousness. So mind consciousness functions it plays the role of a gardener. And store consciousness is like the earth. We know as a good gardener how to take good care of our mindfulness by cultivating mindful breathing, practicing mindful walking, mindful eating. So that seed becomes very robust. And even when a very strong emotion, maybe there's some trauma in our body, stored in the earth, in the ground of our body and our mind. And someone says or does something, and then that seed of anger comes up very strong in mind consciousness. If we have not taken the time, made good use of those moments when we are relatively okay. We don't have to be perfectly happy, but we have enough food, we're rested, we've had enough sleep. So we use the free time when we feel at ease to cultivate mindful breathing, to enjoy mindful walking and mindful eating. If we've made good use of our time, then that seed is very strong. And so when the anger comes up, we know what to do. We know not to say or do anything, but right away to come back to our breathing. Because we know that if we bring our attention to our breath, that will touch the seed of mindfulness. Because we've done that for so many hours. We've practiced in the monastery or in the Sangha. And so then that seed of mindfulness has a quality of embracing. So it can embrace the flower of anger that's manifesting in our mind consciousness. And when it embraces it, the seed of anger can go back down. Into its seed form in store consciousness. And with mindfulness, we know how not to touch that seed again. So we had a moment of forgetfulness, and somebody says something, and boom, the anger is touched. Okay, so it comes in mind consciousness, but we come back to our breathing. Maybe we remove ourselves from the situation. We enjoy mindful walking, and I do that sometimes when I feel like, okay, I'm not stable. I don't want to say anything or do anything, because it's much harder to fix a broken relationship than to not break it at all, right? So I learned the hard way many times that the best thing is just don't say or do anything in that moment. If you need to, go out, enjoy some mindful walking, you'll be in a better space. You'll have more mindfulness in your mind consciousness, and then you'll know how not to continue to repeat that perception that touched the seed of anger. And then you can, that there's more understanding. So manas, because in that moment, it wants to preserve, protect ourselves. So we feel threatened by what someone has said about us. So right away, it lashes out. It's ready to say hurtful things in return to try to protect. But we know that that's not helpful at all, that we can break our relationship. And it will be very difficult later to rebuild that relationship and the trust that's there. So instead, right away we give rise to mindfulness. So this is how we respond to the situation that manas has propagated. Manas is very tricky. It likes to pose as somebody who does what we really want to do. What I really want to do. It's very good at kind of putting on masks and saying, oh, you're doing this for the good of humanity. Or you're doing this because you're a really good person, you know. You know you want it. And so you put on this, it puts on different kinds of masks. But underneath the mask is always that quality of grasping. That's how I recognize it. Am I trying to grasp onto something, to hold onto it? And then I know that it's manas, no matter what kind of mask it's wearing. So again, manas is not good, it's not bad. It just has a function, which is to grasp and self-preservation. And because it has been because we've acted in the past on those tendencies, it can become stronger. So it is connected to seeds like greed, craving, Thay used the image of a creeper climbing a tree. So manas is like it's like the suckers that hold those little bits that come out to attach themselves to the plant. Here in Deer Park, we have daughter, the orange kind of alien-looking plant, and in the spring when it's very wet, it will start to grow out, and it actually, like, if you look, it grows into the very woody stem of the plant and then back out again. So it's actually like just tearing out the insides of the plant and then using that nutrient, that nourishment for itself, because it can't photosynthesize. So it doesn't have the capacity, so it has to steal it from the other plants that have the capacity to grow with the light of the sun. So manas is like that. It's actually, if we're not careful, it will grow all over mind consciousness and store consciousness, and we become confused. We lack direction. We feel we just are going after sense pleasure left and right, hoping that will bring some kind of lasting happiness. But every time it just lasts for a little bit and then it disappears. And then again, we feel lost. And the more that we've acted out of that manas energy, the more that we feel depressed, despair, anxiety, and fear. Because we feel like our happiness is getting farther and farther away. So the way we arrange our life here in the monastery, it's with an understanding of the nature of manas. Okay, we want to have less of the kind of things like advertisements or films and so forth. We're very conscious of what kind of things we're taking in through our senses, because we know that we can be watering the seed of manas, the tendency of manas to grasp at things. When we go into a supermarket and they're playing some music, it's a love song, and somebody's screaming, "I will always love you," something like that, right? That is the watering that seed. You think, oh, if only I could love somebody like that. But I'm so alone. I'm just walking through the aisles of the grocery store, picking up cans of beets. That's what we feel. And so we feel like, well, if we can get more products in our cart, we feel secure. So practice watching manas when you go to the grocery store. Yeah, people say, right, you shouldn't go to the grocery store when you're hungry. So it's kind of similar, right? So watch your mind. And we have done that practice here at Deer Park. We've actually taken the young people down into the town to go into the shops and enjoy mindful walking and see what goes on with their mind. I think Thay did it first in France, and he said you can only buy one thing. But you practice walking meditation for 20 minutes or a half an hour in the store. Sometimes I practice that, and I really enjoy it. And it feels so free to walk out of the store and not buy anything. Sometimes I'm self-conscious. I think, do they think I'm stealing something? I'm not buying anything. I went into the store. Maybe I should buy something because they'll be suspicious. But they usually don't think anything because I'm wearing the robe of a monk. So that's a meditation on observing manas, like how is it functioning? You're checking out what's in this aisle, what's in that aisle, and what kind of emotions come up when you see the labels on the packaging. What kind of emotions do you feel? What kind of grasping at security is there? Comfort food. So it is ignorant of the law of moderation. It tastes something pleasurable, it wants more. And even though the pleasure is much less, but it keeps going like a train. It has this kind of inertia. It doesn't want to stop. So the way our dining hall is arranged is very intelligent. You serve yourself first, and you sit down, and then we all begin eating together. You don't just like put the food down and just start putting it in your mouth. And you have to contemplate the food. You sit there and look at it. Follow your breathing. And then you eat for 20 minutes in silence, and you can't get up during those 20 minutes. So, because you know you have to sit there for 20 minutes, what is the point of eating very quickly? Normally we try to eat quickly, and then we're full, but our body, the message is not being sent quickly enough to our brain. And so then we get up again right away and go put more food on our plate. And so we eat too much. So there's no moderation. So we have these kind of forms. They're very gentle, very simple. And when new people come, they often get up in the middle of the 20 minutes because it's that seed of manas, like, oh, that tastes really good, I want to go get some more. But you have to, the form is kind of holding that for you. And you just, okay, I just have to sit here. And then often I find after sitting there for 2 or even 3 minutes, I'm not hungry anymore. But if I got up right away, I would get more food. So that's these are all kind of just skillful means to help us to be aware of manas, because we know we have that weakness, we have that tendency to be obsessive about pleasures. And we don't see the danger of pleasure seeking. When I look back in my life, I am very aware that when I'm honest, the suffering that I create for myself and others, there's some kind of pleasure seeking there. There's something I want to get. And even I'm very skillful and I hide it. And it looks very good on the outside. It gives it a nice, like, kind of nice cover. But down deep in there, there's just some kind of maybe, something I was hurt in the past. And so now I want to get that thing. I couldn't get it before. Now I want to get it. Or when I'm young, my parents say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I start to project things. And then as an adult, I think, "Oh gosh, I cannot be happy if I don't realize those ambitions, those seeds that I planted as a young person." So that's all a kind of pleasure seeking. I never thought I would become a monk when I was a kid. But even as a monk, I see that the seeds of things that I had said, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that, they're still there in my consciousness. And if I'm not careful, I can make myself suffer and make others suffer by those seeds still coming up. So the monastery is designed in a way that you can cut off those things. You can be totally happy just being a normal monk. You don't have to do anything special. Everything is here. In fact, the more, in my experience, the more you do like crazy projects and new things, the more those brothers and sisters, including myself, tend to suffer more. Because somehow there's something in us, those seeds that have been planted in society, and then we feel like, oh, we have to do a little bit more than somebody else. Do something a little bit more special. And it's very hard to transform. But I recognize it, and so I try to just practice letting go. I don't need to be special. I don't need to have like some kind of recognition, because I know that actually the danger that's there. There's just a moment of like, oh, somebody I respect says something nice about me. There's a little bit of pleasure,
It's very, very short. But all the pain you create trying to, get those words of praise. I think for me, I look back to when I was a kid and my dad would say, like, good job, or you did well. And then I feel so, it must be good. My dad is a very stable, intelligent person. If he thinks it's good, then I'm on the right path. And so that tendency to look for appreciation continues. And if we're not careful, we compromise our happiness just spending our day looking for appreciation from those who we respect. Even just today, I was out planting tomatoes, and I was practicing looking at my mind like the gardener and store consciousness. And I noticed that one of my elder brothers, who's Thay Phap Luu, who's always taking care of the plants, he came over and said, "Oh, very good." And I felt like some joy. I thought, oh, he's my elder brother. He's like very happy that I'm out growing tomatoes. And or I can get too caught in like, oh, I really want to eat the tomatoes. I can't wait till I eat the juicy, tasty tomatoes. And but part of it is that by planting the plants, we have to take care of it, and it's like really delayed gratification. Right? So you have a lot of time to contemplate the leaves and water the plant and take care of it. And but I noticed that, that's nice. My elder brother appreciates that I'm out planting tomatoes, but I know that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this just as an exercise to take care of my mind. Because I learned from my teacher. He loved to do gardening, and from time to time I've done it in the past, and I know that it's a very that metaphor of cultivating our mind is connected to cultivating the earth. So that's the main reason why I do it. I don't need to have appreciation or even eat a juicy tomato later on. It's just I can enjoy every moment of planting the tomatoes. So that's insight. But manas is just like, I want a tomato. And it just, it will not wait around to plant tomato plants. It just goes straight down to the cooler and tries to get the tomato out of the cooler and eat it. And then and then you sit there, and then you want another tomato. Okay, and the other thing is the goodness of suffering. So manas is ignorant of the goodness of suffering. The teaching on the goodness of suffering is to help us to overcome our tendency to run away from suffering, to pick up our phone, to pick up a book, to turn on Netflix, to do something, but anything that takes us away from our suffering, from the pain, from the uncertainty, anxiety that is inside ourselves. And we have to have a lot of patience, because again and again, when we have some kind of suffering, we just want to run away. We want to run away. And I think as a young person in my 20s, I saw that tendency, and I knew that it's too much for me to change that habit by myself. So I need to have a sangha. I need to find a community that is practicing this. And I know as well that sometimes in the community there's a collective suffering, and we don't want to look at it. And we don't have the capacity sometimes. And we want to go to the beach and just kick the soccer ball around. But if we really see there's goodness in suffering, that it means that there's a reason why we suffer. It's not just random. It's not for no reason. There's actually that pain that we feel inside is there for a reason. And it may not be because of our broken relationships or unskillful actions in the past. It may just be because we ate something and we feel some stomach upset. Most of the time nowadays, when I feel some kind of pain here, right away I think, what did I eat? Or how am I taking care of my body? Have I gone for a walk today? Have I just been laying around? Like, I tried to look more in the present moment and not get caught in things that happened 2 years ago or even last week, and try to interpret that as the source of this, maybe upset stomach. Because I find that usually it's something much, much closer to the present moment, like what I ate for lunch, or how I'm taking care of my body that day, and then something I can change in the present moment. Can listen to a bell. So the tendency of manas is to seek safety, security, and to avoid fatigue, which means it has a tendency to indolence or laziness. So we feel we want to be safe, so we just want to lay in our bed or do nothing. That we feel safe. It's like that tendency of wanting to just throw the covers over you and just hide in the warm ball, just shut out the world, and the suffering will go away. So manas has that tendency. It's like, let's not look at the suffering. Let's just find some pleasure somewhere else, and that will help us to get a little bit of happiness for a few moments. And over time, if we develop that as a habit, then we can fall into a huge depression, because we just going from one bit of pleasure to another, and we don't feel joy anymore. So going out in nature, walking, being in places where there aren't these intense sense pleasures that we're surrounded with, putting away our phone for the day, or at least for a few hours every day, so that we don't have things that we can grasp at. And then, so watering the seeds of joy through being in nature, walking, but also removing those things that are coming into our sense impressions, like our smartphone, or something that's connected to the internet. Then that gives us we're creating a beautiful past for ourselves by doing that. We're creating moments where we are not taking in pleasures, sense pleasures, where we feel joyful. And if we have more and more experiences like that, doesn't cost anything, just being in nature, being with our body, walking and breathing. If we have more and more beautiful memories in the past like that, then when manas grasps at the past and happy feelings, it finds the practice, which touches the seed of mindfulness. You think, what is it in that moment? For example, I have I've been reading a book that I really highly recommend to anyone listening, which is True Virtue, the autobiography of Sister Annabelle, Sister Chanduk, the first Western monastic disciple of Thay, because there's so many wonderful stories about Thay, and also she's very honest, sharing about her difficulties and the things she continues to practice with to transform. It's very, very honest. I have a lot of respect for her in the way that she wrote the book. I've been reading near the end of the book, and it talks about when she was abbess of Green Mountain Dhamma Center in Vermont, and the monks were staying at Maple Forest Monastery nearby, and that's where I met the Sangha. The Sangha, they came down to shop in the college town where I went to school, and I was working in the bookstore, and some of the monks came in, and that's how I met the Sangha. And I rode my bike out there for a day of mindfulness, and it's so beautiful. Green Mountain Dhamma Center is just next to Ascutney Mountain, which is a monadnock. It's not in a range, it's just a standalone mountain. It's astonishingly beautiful. And Maple Forest Monastery, when I first went for a retreat, I spent maybe 2 weeks there. And so I have very wonderful, positive memories of Maple Forest Monastery and Green Mountain Dhamma Center. And so reading Sister Shanduk, Sister Annabelle, writing about that, I noticed the seed of attachment coming up in me because we don't have those centers anymore. The brothers and sisters, because of difficulties having the center in Vermont, they had to move to Blue Cliff. And I have some positive memories of Blue Cliff, but not so many as like Maple Forest Monastery. And so when I'm reading the book, I'm aware of manas and the tendency to project images onto the past and think, oh, if I could only, when I'm suffering, I think, well, maybe I should go back to Maple Forest Monastery and just practice there because I had so much happiness there. But we know it's not about the place. It's about the practice of mindfulness, bringing the seed of mindfulness up. The beauty and the happiness that I felt at Maple Forest, it's somewhat the forest, the mountains, but mainly it's the awareness, the mindfulness that I was touching there with the Sangha. And so that's a skillful way to use the past. So manas grasps at the past, and we transform it. That grasping into watering the seed of mindfulness in the present moment. So this is a kind of Aikido with manas. We know manas has this tendency to grasp, but if we built a beautiful past, we spent hours and hours in meditation with benefiting from the collective energy of the Sangha, walking with the Sangha out in nature, doing hiking retreats, whatever. These create a beautiful past. And so when we suffer, we know what to do. But if we are spending our hours playing video games or surfing the internet, then we're creating that past for ourselves. And when we suffer, maybe some happiness, some pleasure that we felt playing the video games or watching the film, we try to squeeze some more out of it. Manas is looking to that film, that video game. I remember to try to find happiness. As a kid, I played Nintendo, and sometimes now you can see online like the old video games, and I watch my mind. If I see it, I say, oh, it's like there's all this association. That was a time when my family was very happy. It was very peaceful at home, beautiful summer day, but I would be sitting there playing video games. At that time, we only played like an hour or 2 hours, and that was a lot. Now I hear like people. I heard about young people playing 16 hours of video games in a day. So I feel like, oh my gosh, I felt my parents would get upset at me if it was like an hour playing Super Mario Brothers. But I see that when I look at that video game now in the present, I see this kind of nostalgia, but there's not happiness. I've tried it a couple of times, I admit, as a monk, like playing the video game, and like within a minute or two, I'm like, this is so boring. But somehow as a kid, I really would spend hours and hours doing it. But I just find it like kind of, I just don't find it interesting anymore. But because I was asking myself, what is it that found it so interesting? When I was a kid, my dad got in front of me one time when I was playing, and he's like, on the screen, it's just little photons and light going around. And I just kind of looked at him like he was crazy. I mean, I knew that was true. I was like, but Dad, you're missing the whole point. It's a video game. He was trying to help me see that this is a waste of time. So, fortunately, in the monastery, we have a precept about playing video games. Otherwise, the brothers, we might get caught in that. Because because a lot of the monks, at least, I don't know, maybe some of the sisters too, but I heard from more of the monks, some of them became a monk because they were addicted to video games. Some of our brothers, and they could not stop. And so they need to take time and many years of practice to build a beautiful past where when manas goes and grasps at those things that bring happiness, they actually find mindfulness. So this is where I find we can, if we learn and we understand how manas operates, we can find skillful ways to do aikido with manas and turn it into mindfulness or compassion or happiness. Some of us know Kata Zordini. He's developed the Plum Village app, and talking to him, I hope he doesn't mind I share. I think he was an app developer, and that tendency to want to work on the computer, was causing him to have a lot of suffering. So he decided, what if I started to make a Plum Village app? So I'm making an app, but it's with the content from Plum Village, like meditations of the brothers and sisters and Thay, and people can, and then I can share it for free. And so that's another way of like doing aikido. So he continues to develop apps, but to help people to suffer less. And that brings joy to him because he also gets to practice the meditation. And eventually he came to Plum Village, and now he's living there. And so he gets the benefit of the Sangha, and the Sangha helps him to build the Plum Village app. So these are all kind of skillful ways where we can, instead of trying to like fight against manas, because that's also manas, fighting against manas, we can understand its nature and do a kind of aikido so that the grasping nature of mindfulness is transformed into a gardener, the gardener of mind consciousness. So Thay says, thanks to the practice of mindfulness, concentration, and insight, mind consciousness is able to see what manas is not able to see. So mind consciousness is expensive. It takes a lot of our energy, much more than store. So we learned in the previous classes that store is very kind of low energy. Now we have like chips that use very little energy. They can run for many days or many months even with very little energy. So store is like that. It's just operating in the background all the time, appropriating from our environment. All these things that are coming into our sense impressions, they come and they touch and they water the seeds and store consciousness automatically without us being aware of it. But mind consciousness takes a lot of energy. It's like the screen on our computer. It's drawing a lot of energy in order to, on the one hand, access, upload information from store, and to display it in our mind. So it is like the display of our mind. It is what's there right now. So if we are aware of our breathing, that is what is going on the screen of mind consciousness. If we are aware of what we're eating, that's what's on the screen. And that is the practice of mindfulness. But if we are just having an endless stream of thoughts that are being stimulated by mind consciousness, the ruminating of manas, Thay called manas the lover. It is like in love with store consciousness. And so it's always ruminating about things and planning and kind of scheming. And so if we're not careful, that is what is coming through the screen of our mind consciousness. And what I've noticed is that when something comes up on the screen of mind consciousness, that means it's becoming strengthened in store consciousness. Even just being there, even just giving a little bit of our attention is not neutral. It's automatically strengthening that seed. We're creating a past that becomes a reference point when we suffer. And then we grasp at that, whatever has come across the screen of our mind consciousness. So we should be, this is why we practice being mindful of our senses and we come back to the present moment. Because then we, in that moment, we are not grasping at the images that manas is projecting on store consciousness. Instead, we are giving our attention to what's going on in the present moment. Do it with our eyes, our ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So that waters a seed of mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And if mind consciousness gives rise to mindfulness, gives rise to concentration, and gives rise to insight, it can help no longer be carried away by the action of manas. So mind consciousness plays a role in helping us to deal with this tendency of grasping in our mind. And I said, manas just asks to be left in peace. Leave me alone. Stop bothering me with mindfulness. Just let me indulge in my obsession. That is that kind of thinking is typical of manas. And we learn that if we really want to wake up and we want to help ourselves, we have a deep aspiration to go on the path of a bodhisattva. It means transforming our suffering and helping others to transform. Then we have to overcome this fear that is the food for manas. We have to go deep in ourselves, and it takes training. But we, again and again, we come back to, I will not be carried away by my fear. Manas, I know you are there. And I can smile to you. I don't want to try to crush you or defeat you. But I know that you don't have much insight. And following your tendency to be obsessed with sense pleasures will bring me suffering. So I want to smile and dwell happily in the present moment and not follow you blindly like I've been doing in the past. And that is the action of a great bodhisattva, ultimately not fearing death. So cultivating the capacity where we are, we learn to dwell happily in the present moment, and that is already enough. So we don't worry about dying. And because manas is based in this survival instinct, when we don't worry about dying anymore, then we become free from its grasping tendency. And we feel more at ease, we feel light. That is in the Mahayana text, they say, the bodhisattva rides the waves of birth and death without fear. And that is when we become free from manas. We're no longer carried away by our fear for this body continuing. We have a deep trust in our inherent goodness. So, this is a little bit about manas and how to practice. And I hope it gives a little bit of insight into how to observe it in our own mind. My experience is that manas manifests in many different ways. So reflect on this teaching about masks and see how manas tends to appear in different shapes and forms, but always with this tendency to grasp something. But it comes up with many different reasons for doing it. And most of them are really, really compelling reasons. So just watch and just smile and say, Manas, I know you are there. I don't need to follow your running, your tendency to get carried away by fear. And it's important to say that sexual energy is amongst other things, is a way of fulfilling our need as a species to continue. And manas is also there, right? It's the quality of self-continuation. And so but we learn that that is just one part of life. That is not the whole of our life. So this is the practice of moderation. Because it may be that in a consumer society, we are being conditioned by sexual energy, right? By images that promise sex or promise a kind of pleasurable sexual experience, that we are being maintained in a constant state of grasping. And this is a kind of mindfulness spell. And it's also my experience that, yes, of course, sexual energy is there, but the way in which that seed is watered by things that we see in films and music and advertisements everywhere around us, that is added on by culture, by society. And so it gives us the impression that sex is everything. So we need to watch that. That's why we are a community of resistance. We're not against sex. We see it as a very normal energy. what we want to do is create an environment where we're not watering that seed of sexual energy constantly throughout the day, like it is. I mean, I observe it when I go down into town, just here in Escondido, through the music or advertisements or anything. When you live in an environment which is very wholesome and you're not exposed to those things, you notice it very clearly when you suddenly go into town. So the Plum Village tradition is very clearly a community of resistance to that tendency to drive us to consume, to become like a hungry ghost, just never fulfilled, never enough. If we're not careful and we let the energy of manas and grasping be driving ourselves to act, to speak, to think throughout the day, we become what we like to call in Buddhism a hungry ghost, which is it's just very, very horrible existence. No matter what we eat, no matter what a hungry ghost eats, it's like they have sometimes they're depicted like they have a big stomach and a very narrow throat. And they try to eat all the time to try to fill their hunger, but they can't, because it's just this very narrow throat. And it doesn't mean someone's really like that, but it's to depict what happens to us if we let the energy of manas just run rampant throughout the day, just seeking for one thing and another. We become like a hungry ghost. In moments when you have clarity, you can see, I'm not being fulfilled by this. You don't have to have the monk tell you. You observe it with mindfulness. You say, this is not bringing me happiness. But the obsession might be so strong that you just keep doing it anyway. And then maybe you need to find a way to get out of that situation. You come to the monastery. For some people, it's so severe that they need serious psychiatric help. But if we are able to observe that and have insight and see that we've created a kind of living hell for ourselves, then we should start by finding a sangha, a group of people we can practice with, maybe just once a week. And in that 1 hour, the happiness, and we might experience a little bit of happiness and joy, and that is the seed. It's kind of a taste of Zen that helps us to know what our path is. Okay, thank you for listening. Thank you guys for coming and supporting during lazy days.